Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Breezy Point Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. I'd like to start by welcoming our two new members, Marcy Weaver and Mark Miller. Welcome. Would you be willing to share a little bit about yourself with us?
Sure. I grew up in the area. I spent 20 years living here in Breezy Point itself, and I have a business in the area, and my family's in the area, so I'm very familiar with kind of the community and a lot of the people and the places here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Mark?
Yes, my family and I moved to Breezy Point in 2017, so we've been in the area now for 2 years, and we're happy we made the transition.
We're happy to have you. I will call the meeting to order, and the first item on our agenda is election of officers.
I nominate Joe Ayers to be chairperson.
I didn't even ask for nominations yet.
Move right along.
We have a nomination. Do we have any other nominations for chairperson?
You want to have a little discussion?
I think I have to say it 3 times. Are there any other nominations for chairperson? Any other nominations? Tracy?
Just a comment. I'm excited to have these 2 new people, not only because they're new, but they have an interest in the area and they are younger than some of us. Yeah, but I believe you've done a good job, and I think think you ought to continue on as the chairperson for another year or so.
Thank you. All in favor of that nomination, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Thank you. I will now take nominations for vice chairperson.
I would nominate Roger.
Oh, that's a good strategic move. Any other nominations for vice chair? Roger usually sits there.
Are we allowed to second the nomination?
Yes,
I'd second the nomination for Roger as vice chairperson as well.
Good. Any other nominations? Any other nominations? If not, all in favor of that nomination, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Passed. Thank you. We will move to approval of the December minutes. I would entertain a motion for their approval.
I would move that they be approved as submitted.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Any discussion of those minutes? If not, all in favor of those approval of those minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Motion passed. I guess I should have mentioned, especially since we have 2 new members, that my vote is always in the affirmative unless I choose to vote against something, and I will state that. So my vote will be in the affirmative unless stated. Council liaison report. Mr. Maroney,
Yes.
Councilman Maroney.
City Council met last week on Monday. Number of things were on the agenda, and I'll briefly go through those, but feel free to ask any questions. First and foremost, the comprehensive plan was adopted that the P&Z had passed on. So that has been adopted, and Sourcewell is finalizing some final details on that, grammatical changes and whatnot, and we'll have that. We haven't received the final copy yet, have we, Patrick? Okay.
More than one.
Other items, we accepted a number of donations. Fletcher Foundation, again, $10,000 for the city, cemetery use or other use as they see. Some other donations as well. We accepted our organizational resolution. One thing to note is council will meet during the summer months at 6 p.m. Versus the 7 p.m. Just for a few months there. And number of purchases for Public Works and police squad car. So unless Patrick can think of anything else outstanding, I'd be more than happy to answer any other questions that you may have on the agenda.
Any questions, Marcy?
No.
Mark?
None.
Tracy?
One question, the council approved the long-range comprehensive plan. Was that with the modification that we had recommended?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Michael. I will open forum number 1. Would anyone like to speak? If not, I will close open forum number 1. You'll have another opportunity later in the agenda under open forum number 2. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing to consider a variance request by White Birch Inc. I will open the public hearing for that variance request and ask the applicant for a presentation. I would assume, David, you have a presentation?
I'll do the best I can.
Okay,
Are you ready for that?
ready.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. David Landecker representing White Birch Incorporated in regards to this variance request. So, actually, I didn't, put together any particular PowerPoint. I read through the application that I had submitted as well as the information. Hopefully, we'll have a chance to review that. Your planner has, Jerry has provided you with staff comments, which are, they're all pretty clear, and I think they sort of sync together. But, in a nutshell, the way I see it, is that unfortunately this particular piece of property, from the time the variance was granted in 1979 through construction in 1980, things didn't happen like they do today. I mean, it's 40 years ago, so put yourself back in a place 40 years ago, and the city was probably just excited to have somebody come out there and build a hook up to the new sewer system that was installed and start receiving benefits from that. You didn't have the shoreline ordinance in place that you have today. Things were just done differently. And I'm not going to say haphazardly, but nearly. You didn't have the scrutiny that you have today with people looking over your building permits and making sure that buildings are built according to what the variance may have been granted for, etc. So, Jerry kind of summed it up in his report as to, that the applicant at the time that this was built probably didn't do very good care in following that which he did get approved. That being said, there's a variety of variances, and I just, I'll go through those quickly with you just so that the record is clear as to what we're presenting. I know that the map is up on the screen there, and I just colored up one here just so you can identify, but the first one listed is the 8.4 foot setback from the angle point on the road right of way, and that's right here. And the original variance that was granted back in 79 for that was 18 feet. And what's interesting, and I know you've all seen this, and I've watched in past conversations, is how is it possible that they could have been off 10 feet? I'm not exactly sure how it happened. I mean, we can only speculate, but if one were to draw a line across and ignore the angle point, you would be close to the 18 feet. In fact, you'd be like at 20 feet or thereabouts. If one took and measured from the center line of the road, which was there, and thought, well, the center line of the road should be built within the right-of-way, and the right-of-way is 40 feet, so if I go 20 plus 18, that's where I'm going to put my house. That's possible how it happened. But in any respect, it happened. Good or bad, it is what it is. I think of it now, and I was telling Jerry this afternoon as I walked in, had it been built at 18 feet, the building itself, the house and the deck, would have been 10 feet closer to the lake. The lake would have only been 12 feet away from the decks. And so it's sort of like, you know, fate, as fate would have it, it's probably good that it ended up where it did, but nevertheless, it doesn't fit what was approved back at that point in '79. The next variance is the 22-foot variance from the OHW, which we're requesting. And at that time that this was approved, it was 32 feet. So there's a number of things that, you know, that have happened that could, you know, that potentially change that. And one is if you look at the survey, there's another line out here, which was the lake shore line that was done back in 1979 when the lot was surveyed. Well, there's about a 10-foot differentiation there. And if you're familiar with that side of Pelican Lake, it gets, you know, plummeted with wind and ice heaves and everything like that. And so what's really interesting is back when the lots were platted in the 60s, if you look further to the east, there's another line. That's where the shoreline was back when the lots were platted. So I mean, that shoreline has moved, you know, nearly 50 feet over the course of the last 50 years. And so that's, you know, one of the factors which is weighing on why the variance was required in 1979, why we're looking to kind of reinstate that today, and why it's 22 feet today versus the 32 feet that it was back in 1979. The next two are the decks. So we've got a deck on the first floor and a deck on the second floor. And they show up here. One is we're asking for 15 feet on the first floor and 16 on the top. And the decks are probably the biggest contention here because, and probably mostly why we're here tonight, is because the decks were never part of any of the applications in '79. They weren't part of the building permit. They weren't part of the original sketch. They weren't part of the variance process. So part of our discussion tonight is centered a lot on the decks, and they're being placed where they were at the time in 1979. Now the decks have been there since this was built, so again, almost, you know, 40 years and counting. So the decks are there. The lot size was, the variance that was requested in 1979 was 8,000 square feet. I'm showing you that the lake moved, and thereby moving reduces the land area. So today's square footage area of that lot is 6,170, where it was theoretically 8,000 back in 1979. Side yard variances, there were no side yard variances approved at the time this building was laid out. And so again, we've had a survey done. It was a requirement that we have a survey done to see what was going on with all the various parts of this project, which is in, you know, hindsight, a good thing that we did that. So the side yard setback, where 10 is required, the actual closest place that the building footprint comes in is 8.6, and then we've got a bump out for a fireplace, which ends up being 6.5. So those variances are needed to establish that location of those of the building as it got built, and versus the 10-foot that would have been allowed had it gotten built where it was supposed to have been built at the time. The impervious coverage currently stands at 47.9, and that's with all the improvements that exist on the property based on your ordinance's measuring process. And where 25% is allowed. So the building, the decks, the driveways, everything, the roof is all considered impervious, and when you add it all up and you divide it by the now 6,000 square feet, nearly half of the property is impervious. So that's a variance from the 25%. the structure in the shoreline impact zone. So there's as you dig into the shoreline ordinances, there's a shoreline impact zone, which is half of the setback distance, half of the building setback distance, which is kind of a no touch me area. And so when you're building a new home or new construction, in this particular instance, if there was nothing on this property, the first 25 feet from the lake would be left in its own natural state, or left in a state that would be lawn, mowed, whatever it might be. And your building setback would be at 50 feet. So you'd have 50 feet. You'd be able to do stuff out in that between 50 and 25 feet, but the 25 feet would be left in lawn or whatever the case might be. That shoreline impact zone, as well as impervious coverage, all came about after the DNR adopted or revised shoreline ordinances back in the 1989. So in 1989, the DNR went through a very aggressive process of modifying the shoreline ordinances. And they did it because they found that in the 80s there was just a lot of activities on the lakes. Stuff was happening, people weren't taking as much care of the lake as they had hoped would just be common sense. So they adopted some very wide range ordinances that covered a lot of things. And as the newcomers here, you'll see that there's bluff ordinances, there's the shore impact zone ordinance, there's impervious coverage, there's stormwater, there's just an endless cycle of new things that came about in 1989. The city adopted that ordinance along with some of their own modifications in about 1991. So the SIZ actually didn't come into play until 1981. Well, this property had been built in 79, so precedes any of these kind of new ordinances being put on top of them, and that's the point I'm trying to get at, is that it was sort of like there wasn't an SIZ at the time this was built. It wasn't even a consideration. It is now, and I get that, but this isn't new construction. It's been here for 40 years. So, so that's the variances, I guess, before I move to other things that I'll say here. Does anybody have any questions specifically on those items? That anybody want to talk about a specific distance or how it may have came about, or?
Marcy?
No.
Mark?
No.
No,
Tracy? Okay.
Okay.
Guess not.
All right, so from my perspective, and I think if you've read the report, we're sort of, the applicant is looking at this like, well, this has been here for 40 years, and the same parties that built this built in some of the adjacent properties with the same type of construction, same buildings, same decks, everything else, whether it got missed or not. At the time of the original permit went out, the records certainly are clear that they don't show it till eventually the city does discover that this deck and the shed that's in between the two property lines show up. I mean, there's a note in the file that says, hey, this is the way it is. And when I looked at that note, it sort of it was from Tim Plipnick, who at the time was the public works person. It was probably one of going out inspecting a property, and maybe for taxation purposes, coding, whatever, he jotted down a note, hey, there's a deck and this there. No action was taken by the city, it was just a note in the file. As Jerry stated, it's in my application as well, as in 2002, this all came to light in a permit that evidently was being looked at, and I don't know if it was the city administrator or clerk at the time, or planning and zoning person, and the city attorney were corresponding about that this situation existed. Well, what should we do about it? Well, nothing again happened. It just, it fell kind of on them. Nothing happened. But it's in the record. I mean, it shows there. It's in the file for this. I think it's important to note that the city did at that time recognize it was there, and it could have been, this whole process could have been done then, and we wouldn't be here sitting today going through this and going through this application. So with that, I mean, I've read the city city planner's report, and, you know, we believe that the variances should be granted for the various reasons that we stated, none of which, or all of which, I guess, you know, are part of time, you know, the time that this has sat on the property for 40 years, the fact that the lake shore has moved, the lot configuration is peculiar enough that it causes some of these situations to exist even back in 1979 as they do today. So it's, you know, it's one of those things where we just think time has, you know, put us in a place where even if the decks hadn't been approved by variance, they've been recognized and used and remodeled, and things are done to them that the city has sort of, you know, turned their eyes, so to speak. Not that that's right or wrong, but that the decks are there. It's not something that, you know, if you had a deck on your property and that was your main access out the front, and that's how you used it, it would be difficult to just remove it, to take them away and say, yeah, you don't have a deck anymore. So again, going through the report that staff put together and Jerry put off, I mean, we're obviously here because we would like you to support the application. And so with that, we do support his notes on the approval of it. We recognize the fact that one of the things is the lower deck is, the main reason that we were in here is because we wanted to do some improvements to the upper decks, the ones on there on the upper level. And that's when this whole issue of the decks hadn't really been addressed before in the past with any kind of permits. And that's the case. We want to replace those and repair them. The lower deck is still sufficient enough that it doesn't need repair, and you know, we're hoping that we can modify the planner's request, and that the removal of the changing of that deck on the bottom could be done at such time, like the driveway, when it's necessary, when it requires those future improvements. That will make the improvement to the lower deck, put in the impervious engineer design, the pervious engineer design below it to accommodate that. So the other thing that I did send to staff was, and I'm not sure if it is or how, if it's became part of your record, but one of the comments that he has in his, so if we went through his comments, he says if you choose to take the actions of potential approval of, you know, the setbacks, and he lists all what the setbacks are: structure in the historic impact zone, approve the ground decking to be constructed as long as it meets standards of construction, but with the city engineer for the pervious standards. Second floor decking allow, require the future improvements of reconstruction of the driveway and sidewalks. So when we look at the plan that's up there, if you look on the road side, you'll see that there's some hashed, or not hashed, but it's got like little triangles and spots. That's the concrete paving and sidewalk area are the access to that building. And what this note pertains to is that we would convert those to pervious materials at the time that they needed to be replaced. So let's say the city repairs or has a reconstruction project on Shoreview Lane, requires people to deal with the parking, we would probably deal with it at that time. If our concrete becomes deteriorated and it's time to replace it, we would deal with it if there wasn't a city street project. So we just deal with it when the time came to repair or replace that. Item 4 is all runoff for the property directed to rain gardens prior to discharge. So I sent staff this picture, and I don't know if that's one that you've seen in the file or not, I don't know that it got in the file. But essentially, it shows that the red outlined area here that's hashed and in yellow is depressed. I mean, that area out there is flat. I mean, we're talking about that this that I've got marked in color is anywhere from a foot in its deepest location to a half a foot. But nevertheless, the water generally runs to those areas, and there's a berm along the lake, and the berm is acting as a dike, and so that's retaining that, retaining the water in those areas. So I was just showing that today that's what we would consider the rain gardens in that item C. While they're not necessarily rain gardens, because it's lawn, it's the area that the water goes to, and again, with that kind of ice heave dike along the edge of the lake, it's acts as sort of a dam so that it doesn't just run directly into the lake. If water were to pool up, it just doesn't go in there. It would have to rise about 10 inches in order to spill over the top, which it's all sand out there, so it's never happened. But that being said, that's what that picture illustrates. So that's really all I have for my presentation. Any questions at this point?
Marcy?
Not at this point.
I actually do have a question. Based on the, where would the driveways be in their life cycle of the concrete? I don't know when they were done, so I'm curious to know, are they 10 years old, are they 20 years old, these 30-year-old driveways? Because that would really give me a sense of when in the future this impervious to pervious replacement would occur.
I'm going to defer to Jeff Johnson, is a project manager with the resort, and he manages this particular property, so he might be able to give you some idea.
Jeff Johnson, representing Whitebirch. I am not sure how long the concrete has been there. When the road was redone was what year?
2007.
2007. So in 2007, the pad closest to the road was replaced. Because when they redid the road, they went in 4 or 5 feet, something like that. And so that was repaired right there. So that's about 13 years less than that.
Okay, thank you.
Which it brings up a good point, and and again, for those that are new, not that you maybe aren't familiar with survey drawings, but the drawing that you're looking at that's in front of you, if you look at the road right-of-way line, the area that we're talking about, I mean, if we were to cut right to the letter of what our requirements would be, it would only be that area that would be east of you, if you would, of the property line. It's likely that's not how it would happen, because it would just be really odd. I mean, if you're going to replace the whole thing, you're going to replace it, and my guess is you're going to replace it with like materials. But that's something that would need to be determined at the time that was done, but that's what happens. The other thing that's interesting, and after Jerry put his report together and I responded to the report that you're looking at, if you incorporate the decks into a pervious state, if you put that engineered material below it so that as it goes into the ground, it permeates through that engineered pervious material, and do the street relocations, by taking those two areas and turning them into pervious, bring us to our 25%. So all of a sudden we're back to where we need to be at some given time to meet the code. So I was once in Jerry's position at Crow Wing County, and I'm not sure, and this just came to me as I'm standing here, Jerry. If you were to approve a variance for 47% impervious, have you just allowed that to be the case? I mean, if we say that we're gonna do the pervious improvements, no impervious variance would be required. I'm not sure how to handle that. Just to make sure the record is clear as you go forward. Because if you do grant a 47% impervious, that would be me arguing and say, we're not gonna do anything. We're gonna leave it just as it is, it's gonna stay impervious, even if it's reconstructed or rebuilt. Then we're at 47.5%. The variances live with the property. So once the variance is approved, whether we own it or not, it goes to the next person. It will continue to operate on that basis. So, sorry I brought that into my mind, but
Tracy?
Yeah, question. I'm assuming that driveways slope away from the house towards the street. Is that a fact?
yes.
Wouldn't that actually be, in this case, desirable rather than having it go right down into the sand so close to the lake?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the roads typically become a conduit for, pervious treatment. So many times, I mean, that's why you have ditches, right? You drive down County Road 11, you see ditches. You go down new city streets that are being built, they got ditches. Well, part of the ditches, the reason a part of the ditch is there is not only to handle the surface water that's running down the ditch to a lower area, but it also allows it to, in many cases, pool up. You see ditch dams going down certain roads, or they're actually damming it and causing those things to happen. I know there's a person in the audience that's going to speak towards this that has, personal knowledge from living in a neighbor, but my contention would be is the right-of-way would be a good place to handle runoff from the homes. That's the direction they're going. The case of the fact is that it's a more global neighborhood issue. And if you look at the picture that I think might have been the first part of the application, might show multiple homes up and down the street here with very similar driveway patterns where they just got these driveways and that street is choked so there's no way to put ditches in. And it's so flat and close to the lake elevation already. I mean, it's almost 3 feet separation right now that it's complicated. That street out there, Shoreview Lane, from the condominiums back to, I'll say, the where the one-way is for the city park right there, is complicated because it's so flat. And yeah, I mean, we're a contributor, but we're not the only contributor. So.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Are there known issues now with water with that roadway?
Not that I'm familiar with because of the sand and things. I mean, I don't think water stays there for long. I mean, I can tell you, a lot of streets, this one probably as well, that when you have a lot of heavy rains, there's probably water that sits out in some of these areas, but it doesn't last long, just because of the nature of the soil out there. But I'm not a resident out there. I don't see it occur every day. And with that, I'm going to depart unless there's other questions, and I'll be in the audience. I can answer more too.
Actually, I have one more question. You prepared the attached exhibit that went with the application
Yes.
in part 9 on section B, which is page 18. You mentioned fees that were paid that the applicant would request be waived or refunded. Are those the fees that you outline on page 20?
No,
That is not.
no, the fees that were paid just for the application, so there's a $250 application fee
Okay,
for this to just come here tonight, and the fees generally, the purpose of the fees are to offset city staff time as well as pay for notifications in the local newspapers and so forth. You being able to come to the meeting and conduct the meeting, etc. My only piece of putting it in there has no reflection on your current city staff or administration. It simply is the fact that, again, my belief is we shouldn't be sitting here today. This should have all happened in 2002 or even before that. The city knew that this was kind of going on. And so we're in this predicament 40 years later, and it would just have seemed to me, and maybe we would have still had to have a public hearing, but it would have been more of an administrative public hearing. And that would have been sort of a friendly hearing to just, to move things along, to get the record straight so that future generations can deal with it as the facts are today and not be plagued with this, down the road somewhere.
So this was specifically for the $250 variance application
That's all.
only?
Yes.
You'd still be paying the permitting fees
We
for?
pay for everything else,
Okay,
yeah.
right.
The other sheet that we show there is mainly represents activity that's already occurred on the property. So fees that we've already paid or construction that's been done, et cetera. And if you would like to know more about what's been done during that process, again, Jeff is here. He can tell you the improvements that have been made on the property. But since 2012, the resort has owned half of the property, and now they've acquired the other half in 2019. And they've been improving the property. They've been putting siding on, repairing and replacing doors, remodeling inside, repainting, just continually taking care of the property. So, unbeknownst to them, this situation occurred.
Right.
When they came in to get permits, and Jerry, did his due diligence and said, hey, show me when there's ever been a permit pulled for the deck. And so
So these previous expenses were just historical references
yes,
dating back, 40 years.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll be here in case any questions come up.
Thank you. Jerry, would you go over your staff review with us, for us? David did a pretty good job of it, actually.
Well, I'm going to try and keep it simple if I possibly can. The variance request is for lot 65 and 66 of the 17th edition of Breezy Point Estates. The address of the duplex are 29700 and 29706 Shoreview Lane. The property is zoned medium-density residential R2. The existing structure was built with a building permit in 1990 with variances that were approved in 1979. The variances were for a 32-foot setback from the general development lake and road right-of-way of 18 feet and a minimum lot size. In 2002, the owners of the property requested a permit to replace the decks. The city reviewed the file and found that the decks were never permitted, and there were no variances approved for the deck, and it appears that the original structure did not conform to the terms of the original variances. There is a city attorney memo in the packet. And it appears that this issue fell by the wayside in 2002. This past summer, White Birch applied for a permit to replace the deck on the structure. When reviewing the file, we found that the original application and notices of hearing and the evidence of the variances that were approved. We did find that they went through the variance process. We basically find that the decks were never included in any of the applications and therefore is an illegal, there were no permits for it, so therefore they're illegal structures. Based on the above, we ask that the applicant provide a current survey showing the property as it is sitting there today. That is part of your packet. Based on the survey, the applicant is requesting after the fact variances for the structure and the decks, also variance from the 25% impervious coverage requirements. Jeff has gone through those requests. I'm not going to belabor him. they're pretty self-sufficient. Access to the lots is from Shoreview Lane. The zoning of the property, again, is R2. Normal requirements are a lot area of 15,000 square feet, a road right-of-way setback of 30, the OHW setback of 50 feet, the impervious coverage is 25%, and the building height of 25 feet. These structures are serviced by municipal sewer. My report shows the definition of what variances are, and I will not go through that part of it. The applicant contends that the practical difficulty is the size of the lot and the structures are existing structures and have been around for 40 years. It appears that the builders of the structures, not the current owner, ignore the terms of the original variance and constructed to their liking and decided to add decking at some time. We do not know when that was added, whether it was part of the original deck or not. And I gotta say, these folks did not build the structure. The structure was built by some previous partnerships. The applicant is requesting variances to legally validate what has been done and rehabilitate the deteriorating decking. The use is consistent with the character of the surrounding neighborhoods. The following finding may be used to support denial of the variance request. The commission finds no practical difficulty. Property should be brought into conformance with the original variance. That may not be practical, but that would be one way to address the situation. The following finding fact may be used to support approval of variance request. The property is part of a 1964 plat which predates subdivision regulations. The lots are somewhat irregular in shape. The dwellings are serviced by municipal sanitary sewer. The structure, less the decks, appears to be what was originally permitted, but not situated in the lot as was applied for. It would be impractical to move the structures to comply with the original variances. Proper permitting was not obtained for the decks, upper and or lower. By utilizing the variance process, an opportunity does exist to reduce the impervious coverage and improve the quality of the runoff into the lake. Potential actions that the commission could take. The following approved roadway setback of 8.4 feet, building setback in the OHW at 22 feet, lot size requirements of 6170, side yard setbacks of 6.5 and 8.6 feet, and approval of a structure in the impact zone, in the shore impact zone. The ground level decking in the shore impact zone, construction of decking and in ground built to pervious standards to be approved by city engineer prior to construction. That could be a condition of any approval. It could be the second floor decking, a 16-foot variance from the OHW and allow in the shore impact zone. We could require that future improvements or reconstruction of the driveway and sidewalks be of pervious construction. And all runoff from the property to be directed to rain gardens prior to discharge to the lake. As David stated earlier, when you look at the survey and you look at what was there, it looks like the building itself, from depending upon where they measured from, on the road and or the OHW, kind of conforms to what was approved back in the day. What was never considered was the movement of this structure towards the side setback, which was never approved. But that we have to live with that. That's the structure. I think the bigger issue today becomes the decks and what's done with the decks. I think, again, I think as my report says, I think you have an opportunity to take that 47% impervious coverage and get that reduced to some number that's livable and will contribute to the improvement of the quality of the water to the lake. I believe that's true. The other thing I have a concern about is if we go ahead and just carte blanche say, okay, it's there, we're going to approve this. What's the message that you're sending? Are you really sending the message that it's easier to ask for forgiveness after you do something than it is to ask for permission and do it right? I think that's a concern. With that, I'm available for questions.
Any questions of Jerry? Marcy?
Well, I have a question because I'm new. The impervious coverage interests me because that kind of solves the problem. Common sense, we can't move a building that was structured, and we can't solve the fact that the lake has moved. But we could solve the impervious coverage. Is there the ability to put a time frame on that so it isn't something where in 30 years, if it gets sold, the next owner's like, well, I didn't agree to this, or whatnot when it comes to improving that driveway and making that impervious? Is there a way to put a time frame in it to make it a reasonable change?
I think you probably could put a time frame on the driveways and the sidewalks. I think if you're going to be serious about the decks, that should be done at the same time that they should be a condition of the variance. And I'm talking about both the upper and the lower.
Mark?
Jerry, do you think that Tracy pointed out earlier in regards to the driveways, the watershed to the road right away? Do you think that's the case with the pre-existing conditions right now, that watershed is going directly to the road in a I guess, a responsible fashion?
I think we haven't got to the next section of the agenda here, and maybe before I answer that question, I think that's going to be addressed by a gentleman in the audience.
Okay.
Who lives there and probably has a better idea of what's going on.
Tracy?
No questions.
Michael? Do you? No? Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
David?
if I could just have just a brief minute before you open
Sure.
to the public. So after your staff comments, I just wanted to, and again, especially for the new people, but even those that have been here for a long time, I've been in this business for 40 years. And again, sat in Jerry's seat for a few, but most of the time it presented cases like this to commissions. This is not normal. This is like one of the most unusual variances that I have seen come across my desk before. And partially it is typically variances come to you when somebody is adding something. They're adding the deck. They're adding a garage. They're doing something to enhance their property and needing to mitigate that against what your current ordinances talk about. And that's where this is unique, in that I honestly, personally don't know that I've ever seen this before in my business career. What I've seen before is somebody going out there and building the deck. The house is there, and last year they went out and built the deck. And now we're sitting in front of you because, we didn't go get a permit. We just saw all the neighbors had decks, so we're gonna build one. And now we'll have an argument about whether it was in the right place or not, and pay fees and all kinds of stuff to get here. So this is really unique. I mean, I understand where we're at with it, but I want to let you know, just from a professional perspective, this is really unique. It's not something that just you're gonna see every day of the week. You may never see it again in your career here sitting on this planning commission. I think it's the first time I've actually had one that is just 40 years worth of building that's been just sitting here hanging out. And now we're dealing with it. But that being said, I wanted to acknowledge the fact, again, if you choose to move forward with actions in the affirmative, that in hearing and reading what was just said to you by your staff is, and I understand the rationale behind all of it, but from the applicant's perspective, the ground level decking wasn't scheduled for replacement. So they were hopeful that they could throw that into, similar to the road, into future improvements. Not that they would not consider doing it, they will do it, but just at such time that that deck would be replaced. And I think the deck probably was replaced in 2002, wasn't it, Jeff? Isn't that what that discrepancy was?
There was a permit for deck repairs in 2015. I don't know if the deck was replaced in 2002.
Okay. Other than that, and we've kind of talked about the stormwater and those kinds of things. I mean, I think we're in agreement with where we need to be on all this. It's more a matter of time, and it's chicken and the egg of where we're at here. And again, I understand your staff's comments, and I'll let the planning commission move however they choose to based on our presentation. Thank you.
Joe? Chris, do you have a question? So are we to understand that at this time, if we go forward at this point, you're not, the applicant is not planning on replacing the deck today or soon, and not planning on replacing the patio, the two decks? You're not planning on doing anything?
I'll let my construction expert answer.
Jeff Johnson, representing Whitebrook. At this point in time, the lower deck, no, we're not planning any replacements for that at this point. The upper deck has some issues that need to be dealt with.
Okay.
And that's what we were trying to work on, was the upper deck and only the upper deck.
Is the lower deck concrete?
Wood.
Wood. The lower deck is wood.
Mhm.
So
And it's about
theoretically,
2 steps up off of the
but
ground.
theoretically, it's such that moisture will get down through the deck as opposed to
Correct.
off the deck. Okay.
Yeah, it goes off the deck, through the cracks, off the
Yeah.
ends, goes into the lawn,
Okay.
and it's taken care of. I would like to reference a couple other points. Jerry mentioned the decks. The decks were constructed with the building from the beginning. The decking support are cantilevered out from the building. So they are an extra, I think it's 6 feet out from the building. They are the main beams that hold up the master bedroom and the loft bedroom. They just stick out an extra 6 feet further. So those are original with the structure. Did you guys take a look at the project at all out there? Drive by?
I did. I didn't go around and back.
No, I understand, there's snow there, I get that. There's, if you notice, there's 3 duplexes in a row. Ours was the first one built. There was not a permit for the deck. The next 2 were built, I think it was 83 and then 85, something like that later. The decks were requested with those buildings. I don't know what happened, why they forgot, or what. It was obviously planned from the beginning because it's on those beams that come out from the house. There is one of the items that was on that list of items that were paid for. We didn't pay for it again, we didn't build it. But one of the items there is a penalty fee for variances that were wrong. I don't know what those were. Maybe Jerry or Patrick know, I don't know. But there's a $250 fine for variances that were wrong. If that's the decks, I don't know. But they included the decks on the next 2 buildings. I don't know what the $250 was for.
I would comment also that the building looked nicely done right now in the front. I mean, it looks like you painted it and it looks good from the front.
we're trying to have good curb appeal. And lakeside appeal, so. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. If anyone would like to provide input to this variance request, I would ask you to come to the microphone and state your name and address at this time.
My name is Alan Javinsky. I live at 29711 Shoreview Lane, directly across the street from the subject property. And I'm in a unique position today, not only because I live right next to it, but I participated in that public hearing back in 1979 when it was originally built. So I can give you some of the input as to what took place back then that would help you in your deliberations. In 1979, there was a public hearing where they were considering putting a building on the lots over there. And during that public hearing, there were concerns about drainage. And if you look at the building permit, it's the appendix item A1, are you professional? You can see on there that there was a 18 inches of fill placed on that site that was approved. And when they put in that 18 inches, that's where the concern was of drainage, because that raised the elevation, and where that site, where that area originally drained across those lots, now it was dammed up. So the construction of that duplex, as well as the other two, created a stormwater drainage problem down. Stormwater management wasn't properly taken care of. Fast forward to 2007, when that new roadway project came in place. And in 2007, city staff came out there and met with me, and we discussed the drainage, and the Public Works Director, Ted Palikta, indicated that he was trying to obtain drainage easement because during the design of the roadway, the engineering consultants for the city had determined that there was going to be a severe drainage problem over there. So again, drainage became an issue that the city was involved with. And the Public Works Director indicated that they were going to try to obtain drainage easement so they can get the water out of there. On my site, I put in a rain garden, and that way I was able to contain the runoff from my property as well as a parking lot on the adjacent condominiums area. So some of that water would come into that rain garden, and we kept it off the street. But they continued having problems from those three duplexes, where their water, their stormwater, was not properly managed on the site, went out in the street, and we have serious flooding just from a minor 5-year event, 5-year rainfall event of 1 inch per hour. You'll get anywhere from 4 to 6 inches of water flooding there. That street in the summertime is a very popular trail. Many people are walking it and running it. And that area is difficult for these people, and it becomes a safety hazard. Cars can come through there, and this flooding, like I said, 4 to 6 inches is probably about 150 feet of length. So cars coming through there at high speed would create a backwash, and the water would be splashing all over the area. And if somebody is walking through the 150 feet, they have no way to get out of it, and there's a safety issue that the city could be in a really difficult liability situation because of somebody being injured there. And they've been notified of this, and they've been trying to deal with this since 1979, and nothing has been done. So now, about 5 years ago, the duplex that's part of this application had done some landscape work over there and filled in a swale that was built during that 2007 paving project, where the way the Public Works finally decided to resolve the stormwater drainage was to put in these very shallow swales adjacent to the road in the front yards. And everybody who lives along that street is contributing to that water. It goes into those swales, and then it eventually percolates into the ground and goes away. But that 6 inches of flooding, that 6 inches of ponding water will stay there for sometimes as many as 3 or 4 days. So when this subject property, this is in the application, filled that in, I was suggesting to them today, and we met earlier, that one way to resolve that is to drain that site away to the north and then back around the north side of the house and over to the lakeside. and do that with a very shallow drainage swale, only a couple of feet wide. They can put some riprap at the bottom, some inch and a half gravel can be used there to protect it. And once that water from their area is drained away from that will reduce the contribution to that area that's flooding. It won't eliminate it, but at least once they filled in that swale in the front of their house, now they can make up for that by helping reduce the amount of runoff going down to that area that's flooding. I made my contribution by putting in a rain garden. Other people are planning ways that they can help eliminate that drainage and help manage the stormwater. So I'd like to have it as part of this deliberation today, that the approval of it, and I agree with it, that should be approved. The problems occurred way before Wakebridge ever owned that property. But I say that this should be approved, and I support it, and make a contingent on them contributing something to help remove that runoff, which if they hadn't filled in that swale, most of that runoff from their property would have been contained on their site.
I circled an area up there, is that the area you're talking about?
Yes.
Could you show them where you'd like this 2-foot swale, maybe you have to just draw
This is the paved roadway area right here.
You have to just touch the screen.
Okay, this is the paved roadway area over here. This is my residence. I would say to take the water right off from here and carry it right along, I'm sorry, not from here. Take it right from this point. How do you raise that?
Just like this, like it's a pencil.
Okay. But take it from this point,
Touch it.
have the swale come right around the side. There's a utility pole and a communication terminal box there. But take that swale right back to the side over here, all contained within their property line right of way, property line ownership. And then it can go into the area that they just recently constructed back here. And that's where she can pond and slowly percolate through the ground, cleanse itself, and go out into the lake. So it'll be a very narrow swale, 2 feet wide. I believe we were looking at some elevations over there of maybe 6 inches of depth. And I think that would be a good solution for it. Again, I support what they're doing, but I'd like to make sure that your decision today is contingent on it.
Just for my clarification, you're talking about the green space to the left of the driveway.
That's correct. That's all I've got.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
My name is Steve Jensen. I live at 29668 Shoreview Lane, Unit 905. I just recently moved up here full-time, but I'm aware there's been drainage issues on Shoreview Lane for years. The 2007 reconstruction, where I am at Sundance Villas, the ditches worked because it's a lot bigger area. In fact, our end unit this summer had standing water in the ditch for a long period of time, but it worked as expected. I am in support of these variances being granted, but like Al said, contingent upon the swale being put in for drainage. And the other 2 units, at some point, the city needs to look at the other 2 duplexes and drainage there, because there is an issue. What is Dave and Sheila's last name?
Craig?
Craig, I mean, they've complained, you get those big rains, they have 8 feet of water back on their driveway for 3-4 days. So, I mean, it is what it is. It's tough where you drain it, but things need to be addressed, aside from this hearing as well. So, that's all I have.
Thank you. Gary?
One more, briefly. Gary Bakken, 29464 Shoreview Lane. It was an interesting presentation tonight. My hat's off to the planner. Well done, very well done. And the testimony from Mr. Javinsky and the gentleman that was just up here is very germane to the problem out there. I'm totally in support of this. Everything Mr. Landecker presented is right on. And it's gonna clean up that situation. One final comment on the drainage. We've always had problems in Shoreview Lane, as you all know. If you don't, you know it now. And I had a particular problem out there. My neighbor, it ran by me, and it was shortly after the 07 when the road went in, repavement. And in the hard rains, folks, that it would run right by my property and downhill, right in front of his driveway. And it would back up, and it would back up right up to his garage. 2 times it went into the garage. And finally, Tim Polipnik did come out there and put in a drain. And that rectified it, took care of it. When it plugs, it backs up, and I'm either out there doing one of these, or the city crew is out there cleaning it out. But I support that drainage problem out there as contingent with the approval of the variance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I guess not. Jeff?
Go ahead.
I was gonna close the public hearing, but, go ahead.
Jeff Johnson, representing White Birch. The swale in the front that was circled earlier between the 2 driveways, if you went out there, you noticed that we have a light post and we have 2 trees in that area right now. When we bought I think we bought the right side, the southern unit first. And so we put that in to match what had been done in that same area on a neighboring property 2 doors down. And so if it makes people happy, we could take those trees out. Personally, I think they look very nice, but if that's what makes people happy, we can certainly take those out. At one point when they drew on the upper boundary there, the northern boundary of the property, what was it we have, David, was it 6 feet or 8 feet?
For which one?
The northern boundary.
Northern boundary, the narrowest spot with the fireplace is about 6.5 feet.
We only have 6.5 feet to work with to have a swale go through there. We do, as David showed you, we have put in areas to protect the lake. We put in the riprap, to put in the pea gravel to slow down anything from going through there. We've got compression on both sides of the property to retain water. We're doing what we can do. The area that we're talking about on the north property to run a swale through there, we're not opposed to doing that. We would be willing to look at that. There are a few things to consider. Number one, there are a couple of pedestals there, cable TV, phone. I think there's power in there, but I'm not positive of that. We would not want to have to be responsible for moving that, lowering that, raising that, whatever it may be. We don't think we should, again, this is not our expense. We didn't build this house, we just bought it. And we're trying to maintain it, just all we're trying to do here. And so, we're willing to, if it's, when we were talking about it with Mr. Javinsky earlier today, it's a matter of about 6 inches of dirt. We'll do that, that's nothing. We'll scratch that out of there and make that work. The question becomes is does it need to be engineered? How long does it have to stay on the lawn before it can go over the berm to the lake? Those are the questions that need to be answered by somebody, and we shouldn't have to pay that expense in addition to all these other expenses. We're just trying to make this house last, and we're getting a lot of blowback, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but a lot of other things that are being thrown at us. Sure, we'll give you the variance, but now you gotta do this water retention for everybody. So again, we'll do that if it's only 6 inches. That's nothing, we can do that. But we only have a little bit of room to work with there. And there's a timeshare association across that property line. So I just wanted to point out a couple of those things.
Thanks, Jeff.
I'd like to just add a little addendum responding to what Jeff has said.
Would you identify yourself again?
Yes, I'm Alan Javinsky, 29711 Shoreview Lane. The area where that communication boxes and utility pole is in the right of way. So in order to avoid doing anything destructive to those facilities, the swale can be routed around it. Now, it may end up where the swale would be directly in front of the neighbor's property, but it would be in the right of way. So that could help alleviate any concerns that putting in that swale would be impossible because of the narrow confines between the extension of his property line out to the street, because you can go around it in the right of way and get around those utilities, and it wouldn't be interfering on other people's private property.
Thank you. I will close the public hearing on this application and move to the next item on our agenda, which is our taking official action on this variance request. We have a memo from staff outlining the options for action. I would entertain a motion. Jerry?
I just need to ask a question before you get too far into this. It seems that the drainage issue, one of the solutions is to go on the north side of the building. What would happen if you went to the south side? Is that a potential?
Without Alan Javinsky, 29711 Shoreview Lane.
Thank you.
Without having the benefit of surveying it at this time of the year, I was able to look at the roadway and try to see if I can detect the grade of the roadway. It's very flat out there, and it's some old city sewer construction plans that were done back in 1977. I saw that there's only about 1/10 of a foot of grade that you can work with over there. And when I visually looked at this, I could see there's a break in the road right around the midpoint of that building. So if you went around the south side, it would not help remove that water draining north. You want to be on the north side of that break of the grade in order to get any water going to that ponding area out of there. If you took it around the south side, then you would be in trouble because you're not capturing any of the water that's going to that big ponding area.
The reason I asked the question is when I look at this survey, it looks to me like the grade is pretty much the same on both sides of the building. Looks like it's at 1210. And maybe a swale on both sides of the building is something that's beneficial to the project. I don't know.
David Landecker, representing the applicant, in response to this discussion of drainage. So if you look at the map that's on the that's in front of you, and if you could scribble on the contour line that's out near Road by Shoreview, so it's kind of like at the middle, there's a little nose that sticks out. See that, Patrick? Yeah. So that elevation is 1210. So if you were to trace that elevation, that's a contour line. That like is an island. 1210 is an island, which represents it's 1,210 feet above the ocean. On that island sits that building and most of the driveway. The road, if you look down at the lower part, you'll see there's a little X with a number sitting next to it. It says 1209.48 or 1209.5. That means that edge of the roadway, Shoreview Lane, is a half a foot lower than the island. Does that make sense? So the whole discussion here is we're talking about creating some conduit through a swale or whatever to go from that point, whether it's on that side of the property or the north side, across back to this the picture that I had shown you with the colored, and I can't find right now. In this picture right here. So the point of discussion here is how do we get the water from the street out to the front of the house towards the lake? I mean, there's a couple of things to think about here. One is I think about your comprehensive plan and the relationship of being concerned about the environment and protecting our natural resources, including the lake. You're now taking this water that's at the road, which should be handled out on the road in some form or fashion, and now you're saying, well, let's just push it to the lake. Let's just get it to the lake as quick as we can. I'm not sure that that's the best solution. If it's a solution that the planning commission chooses to take us, that's fine. As Jerry reported, I think, and if you again look at the nose that Patrick threw at you there, the road out there is, again, it's kind of a pivot point, as Al said. The road slopes down going to the north and it slopes down going to the south. So the entire duplex isn't contributing to the runoff to the north. It would be just that half of the building that in the driveway that is on the north side is what's contributing to this piece of water. So not as significant because the roof has gable ends and half of the roof is going towards the lake and hits gutters, etc. But I guess my point is that if you were going to do a swale, and as Jeff said, we're talking about cutting 6 or 8 inches of dirt to get from here to here. It's not significant. It's more a matter of, concerns about utilities on the north side for sure. We don't know what's on the south side either, but you could do that. Contrary to the line that Al had placed on there, again, the property line is the dark line, so we have to be between the driveway and the house in that black line. We can't be on the north side of it because we don't own that property. We don't have control. The plat that was recorded to the north for that duplex did not provide drainage and utility easements. I looked into that because I thought maybe that would be an opportunity, but it's not. So it's possible, but it would be a shallow swale that wouldn't really be that noticeable to the eye. It's definitely possible. But again, it's almost like more from a practical perspective. It should be handled out on the road. I guess I wouldn't be here advocating that we should be moving water towards the lake. I think that that's not the environmentally correct solution. I think there's a different solution which requires more study and shouldn't hamper whether we get variances or not. It's simply, if there's a solution out there that the city needs to look at within their right-of-way, what is the right solution? Even to the extent, as Jeff offered, that island that sits out there that was depressed at one point that they've now raised, or somebody raised and landscaped and put trees in there, that's totally within the city right-of-way. I mean, if that should have been a depression and needs to be returned to a depression, that would be something to look into. And if we need to dig out or create some depressions in the right-of-way between the road and the property lines, that's another avenue to look at versus running a conduit, again, of the rainwater, stormwater from roads, oils, grease, etc. A direct conduit to the lake. These lots are shallow. I mean, we're talking 75 feet or less. I mean, it doesn't take much. I live up here too. I've lived here for over 40 years, and Pelican Lake is something you want to keep it the way it is. So the environmental part has me concerned about trying to take and use this to channel water straight to the lake. That would be my concern.
Jerry?
For those of you that have been around me long enough, you know that the one thing I don't advocate is dumping the water straight into the lake. I think I addressed the need for rain gardens to clarify that water before it gets into the lake and utilize some natural percolation. I believe Mr. Landecker is making an argument for addressing the lower deck and making that pervious material so that we do get that water to percolate rather than getting it into the lake faster. I do believe maybe there is some solutions. The problem that I see is that if you carte blanche do all the variances that they're asking for, you have absolutely no leverage when it comes to the time that the study is done and you need easements to get down to the lake and or to a rain garden. You have absolutely no leverage. Then it becomes a city pay for it. I don't like the city to have to pay for any more than they have to, nor does the applicant like to pay for any more than they have to, and I appreciate that. But I think there's some areas down by the lake behind the natural berm that can treat some of that water before it gets into the lake. And Mr. Landecker and I have talked about that. Whether that drainage should go north or south, I don't know. I'm not an engineer, but when you look at this thing, this is pretty flat. It isn't going to go anyplace fast, but it needs a place to go.
Again, I think it's.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
You closed the public hearing actually
Yeah.
10 minutes ago?
Yes, yeah, we are on our next agenda item, which is to take action on this application. So our discussion should be around a motion to take action.
So you
Tracy?
need a motion
We need,
so that we can discuss this.
correct.
I would move that we approve the actions summarized on page 3.3 of our package. You want me to read each one of them? Approve.
Jerry's done that already,
Yeah.
Tracy, I don't think we need
And
to.
I would approve them as they are written. Which will, well, that's what my motion is.
Tracy, I'll just remind you that it doesn't deal with, your motion then doesn't deal with the future rehab of those
That's
lower decks?
correct, and I
Okay.
have comments about
Okay.
that.
All right. We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second, discussion.
Okay, I have kind of 3 points. One's an editorial comment. We've been up here for 45 years. We cannot understand why they even developed anything on that point. That was years and years and years ago. We think it was out of line. Number two, I believe that we need to allow the property owner to go ahead with these suggestions. They are not the sole cause of these floods and these drainage issues. And unfortunately, I think the city let them do it, and the city's going to have to help figure out how to redo the drainage problem, and it's a tough thing to do. And my third point is that I think that we ought to allow them to go ahead and do what needs to be done for the one building issue, and not ask them to solve the whole problem of the whole damn point.
Other discussion.
I understand that, 40 years ago, someone else did something outside of the new owners. And I think Tracy's right. I think that the variances should be approved as written by staff. I do agree, though, that there are probably means and ways that can rectify watershed issues, impervious to pervious, drain tile systems, water boxes. There are opportunities there, as Jerry has stated. that allow the property to come into compliance and also correct for the future this particular duplex residence.
Thank you. Marcy?
I agree that with the variance, it's a problem that you're dealing with that was previously noted and dealt with when it was originally built. It sounds like the beams were there. The variance makes sense. My thought was that perhaps because of the fact that they did build maybe closer to the road, some of the drainage issues could be due to the structure. Having item number 3 in here, which is requiring future improvements to be of pervious construction, I would hope that that would solve or help with that situation. And that runoff going to a rain garden, as Jerry had added in here, I think would help as well. So as written, I agree that that seems to be an appropriate action.
Michael, words of wisdom.
If I may have a comment. One thing I'm going to point out in regards to the motion is section 2 for ground level decking to be created as pervious. At this time, the applicant is not asking to redo it. So to ask for them to do it, it's not part of their request of redoing it. So I'm confused on would they be required to redo the bottom decking? Because it just says if they were to do it, they need to, but that's not part of their application. So I'm confused on that. There is no timeline on future improvements of reconstruction of driveway. That is a wide open, you have no timelines on that, and maybe that's the direction you wanted to go. I know timelines were discussed. Another thing that you could potentially ask for is, as Mr. Donovan has expressed, is that it's a city issue with the drainage. To request a drainage, and I have no idea if this is possible, request a drainage easement. So if the city were to do something, we would have easement on either that north or south side that we can redirect some water there. I don't know, again, how that would work out. One last comment though, I know we've talked about 40 years, and I agree, this is a problem that was created 40 years ago. One comment that I've heard on this commission before is buyer beware. You know, this would be possible to research, but unfortunately when you buy something, you inherit everything, the good and the bad. But I'm in favor of the variance. I think the deck, it's maintenance, but those are some comments.
Jerry, are you going to say something?
I do believe that you have to address the bottom floor deck in some way, because that was never a legal structure. You have to approve some variances for even that deck exists, just like you have to do on the second floor.
Are you suggesting that they can require a reconstruction of that lower deck upon approval of the variance for the deck?
I believe they can.
Okay.
I believe they can qualify it that it be of pervious nature.
Even though it wasn't part of the application, that's the approval of the variance.
That's right.
Okay.
And can we put a time frame onto that? So if we said within the next 10 years or 5 years or some stated amount of time, would that be within a realm of motion?
I think we could say, if we wanted to, that it be done at the same time the upper deck is done.
And what about for the driveways?
That may be a different situation.
So there wouldn't be any restrictions though. Granted, the portions of the driveways that are closest to the duplex residences themselves are the older portions. The part nearest to the street was redone in 2007 or 2015, one of the two dates. 7. So we're just gonna leave that part wide open? I'd like
That's a
to,
good question.
I'd like to be able to try and get some closure on that end of it as well, or at least get them closer to a pervious coverage 47 down. Granted, 25% is aggressive to try and reach, but there should be something, a middle ground that can be reached.
Are you hearing anything that would cause you to amend your motion, Tracy?
No,
Okay,
somebody else can amend it.
I know. I was just going to ask that question. Would anyone, I would entertain an amendment if we're ready to do that.
Well, I would like to make an amendment that we would approve that with the this section with the amendment that we would require to have the lower decking made pervious space along with the deck rebuild.
The upper deck rebuilt.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I would second that amendment
Could
motion.
you accept that
Yeah,
amendment,
yeah.
Tracy? Okay. Mark, it doesn't address your issue.
No, and I'm not exactly sure how to word it, an
I-
amendment
neither
to
am I.
be able to get to that point.
Walk through what you wanted to say.
I don't know if I can put a 12-month timeline on something like that because I don't know, I'm not an expert in concrete, so I can't state the condition of the driveway, the existing portion. But, as Jerry previously stated, I do believe there is an opportunity there in short order, not something 20 years from now that could be done. So I wouldn't know how to begin to amend, though, I'm sorry.
General comment.
Tracy?
Again, I feel like this is a much bigger problem that is caused in very small part by this one property. And to me, the solution, we're talking about 6 inches of elevation change, 12, it's gonna take a lot more effort to resolve that issue than I think we dare put on the one property owner. Actually, if you look at it, as we've said here, they're at the peak. It goes down one way and down the other way. So they're not part of, or not as much a contributor to the flooding problem that I understand apparently exists. So to me, this motion as amended should stand on its own merit, and I would think we ought to approve it, and then I think it ought to be an issue, I don't know, with the city council, the planning and zoning, or public works, ought to take a look at the whole area as a separate issue.
Further discussion?
I agree with that, and the fact that we do at least state in here that future improvements, so if it was 20 years when it made sense to do that, that there would be options there, which sounds like they were agreeable to doing, so.
I have nothing further to add.
Okay, no further discussion. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Motion passed. That one was one of our bigger challenges.
Welcome to the world. You can't reconsider now.
Right.
We still have an open forum though.
Yes.
They're all leaving, they don't.
I will open forum number 2. If anyone would like to speak before you leave. Gary.
Always take an opportunity. It was a very interesting debate tonight, and my hats are off to all of you, everybody involved. And there was some wonderful testimony, and there was some good thinking put behind that. And this is a project that's needed to be faced for a long time out there. So my congratulations to everybody.
Thank you.
You too, Lon.
I will close open forum number 2 and move to other, which is a discussion of setting time and dates of regular meetings. Jerry, did you have something to say about?
Well, I think typically in the past, the meetings have been the second Tuesday at 7 PM. I mention this because sometimes, I noticed the city council was meeting earlier in the summertime in some of those months. And if you're okay with the second Tuesday at 7 PM, just leave it as it is. If you'd like some other consideration, I think you can set the time and the date of any of the regular meetings as you wish.
Would it make any sense for us to be consistent with the times of the city council meeting?
Just if you want to enjoy the summer more.
I do. What do the rest of you think about that?
Go ahead, Tracy.
Well, I'm programmed into 7 o'clock.
Okay.
And that allows time beforehand to do outdoor stuff. And it still, if you conduct a prompt meeting, allows an hour and a half or so of sunlight afterwards.
Are you okay with that,
I'm fine with the meeting.
I have no objection to the way it stands.
And you made the comment, a couple of these are on Wednesday because of, so and that's why, and it makes sense.
Do we need to take any action? Okay. Anything else under other? You know, all of this discussion of pervious and impervious, I noticed that Pelican Square replaced their asphalt this fall.
3 times.
Really?
In the back, the pervious,
Because it wasn't functioning, David?
it was flooding into the store.
Wow.
Wasn't penetrating through the pavement.
Wow.
You know, if you look out there, there's 2 different colors of pavement.
Yeah,
If you go out there and stand out there, you'll see there's one that's very porous.
yeah, little holes.
Yeah, and that evidently wasn't functioning right, and Anderson Brothers actually dug, tore it out, removed it 2 times, that I know for sure. And made it larger the last time.
The other thing that happens with pervious paving is they're great. It's kind of like your floor. If you don't vacuum it, you don't clean it, it ceases to function.
Mm-hmm, bugs up.
Especially up here with all the silts and the sand. You know, when you have cars driving in grease and oil and it all, it's sort of like if you're familiar, you know, there's pervious paving done behind the, what were they, Lodge Apartments or whatever, Breezy Point? You know, there's a big stretch down there where the big retaining wall was built. That's all pervious, so when it rains, it's supposed to just go down on the ground. And it worked great for the first 5 or 6 years, but if you go down there now in heavy rain, there'll be water standing out of it.
Okay. Well, that's good for us to know.
You know that, but again, because he wasn't at the microphone, people think you were just looking at open space for the last 5 minutes.
Meeting's adjourned.